Welcome to my first video. I'm replacing the transmission filter and fluid on my 2013 Lexus ES350. This procedure is the same for the Toyota Camry V6 and some other Toyota and Lexus vehicles with the U660E transmission. Please check the description for a full compatibility list.
Here are the tools that you'll need for this job. I'll also throw in the part numbers and some links in the description. You'll need a 10, 21, and 24 millimeter socket. The only specialty tool that you'll need is this 10 millimeter 1.7 arc angle wrench from SK Tool. There's this one tricky bolt in the transmission pad, which no other tool I tried really worked. I tried box wrenches, low profile ratcheting wrenches, swivels, U-joints. None of them worked. You'll also need your standard torque wrenches and extensions for your sockets to help. Beside that, you'll also need a scan tool or infrared thermometer to check and verify the transmission fluid temperature. Something to also call out is when lifting the vehicle, please place it on jack stands or using a vehicle lift. You'll just have to make sure that the height of the vehicle is level during the level check procedure. I'm using a Toyota WS approved fluid, which is Aisin, the maker of the transmission. I would recommend using OEM fluid. I'm not picturing it here, but I also used a kit that included the transmission filter and the new gasket. A graduated bucket also is helpful as we need to know how much fluid we drain out. Feel free to pause here to get a list of the tools and parts, as well as throughout the video to get the steps. First, after raising the vehicle on jack stands, or in my case a lift, I'm going to remove the front driver's side wheel using a 21 millimeter socket. Now we have to remove this body trim panel, and to do this, we're going to use a 10 millimeter socket, and there should be two clips that hold this in place. Next, we're going to crack the still plug open. This is a 24 millimeter socket. After hitting the drain plug with some PV blaster because of the rust here, I'm going to take a 6 millimeter hex to crack open the drain plug. Make sure to drain into a measuring container. There's a second drain plug, which is the check level piece. It is this little plastic piece that also is removed using a 6 millimeter hex. This is a little bit messy of a process, and make sure you don't drop your check level plug. We're going to pop off this body panel pin just to get better access when we're removing the transmission pan. I'm going to go ahead and remove the 10 millimeter bolts that are holding the transmission pan in place. They're all 10 millimeter, but some of them are tough to reach. You're going to need a lot of patience for this step. I also kept a couple in place just so they'll hold the pan up and I was able to tilt it away later. Now there is this one bolt right here, which you're going to need to use that 1.7 degree arc angle SK tool wrench here. If you're struggling to get access to this bolt, that wrench it probably will be your best bet. Next, we're going to remove the transmission pan from the vehicle. I'm tilting it away just so all the transmission fluid doesn't get all over me. And I'm unscrewing by hand a few of the bolts I left in, just so I have more control of the pan and the removal process. Remember to keep draining into your measurement container. We need to know how much total fluid drained out of the transmission. Once the pan is off, I'm going to peel off that old gasket. I'll also take some time to scrub away and make sure that the mating surface on the transmission pan is clean. Now, it's important to call out that this is aluminum, so be careful. There are two 10 millimeter bolts that are holding the transmission filter in place. Carefully remove these bolts, and then you should be able to pull out the old filter. this plastic piece off. Clean the pan thoroughly. You don't want any of that old transmission fluid that we're trying to change out, as well as any potential sludge. There are also these two magnets that will need a wipe and make sure that they're clean. Now you may see some shimmering metallic substance or particles. That's normal. And I think that means that the magnets and the fluid is doing its job. But if you see large flakes and spiky shards, it's a sign to maybe save up for a transmission rebuild or a new transmission. Put those magnets back. After this, to make installation easier, I like to insert the pan bolts through the holes and to hold the new gasket in position. Adding some of the old oil onto this new O-ring and making sure that there is not an existing O-ring in that transmission, I'm going to add and install the new transmission filter. The two 10mm bolts get torqued down to 8 foot-pounds. Be careful because the transmission is made out of aluminum. You do not want to strip it. As you can see, I have the new gasket on the pan as well as the bolts all holding it in place. I'm going to go and tighten these bolts in an outwards pattern. And these bolts get torqued down to 66 inch-pounds. Yes, inch-pounds. One of the bolts does require Loctite, and I'll have a call out for it on the screen. Reinstall the level check valve with the 6mm hex. Careful, it's plastic. With the new gasket on the drain plug, we can now tighten this to hand tight. Using a long neck funnel, fill in 500 milliliters or half a quart more than what was drained out. In my case, I had to use about 4 quarts of transmission fluid. I'm also going to keep the fill plug hand tight until after the level check. To check the level and to make sure that the amount of fluid we added is sufficient, fire up the engine and cycle through all the gears. Now's the time you want to be monitoring the temperature with the scan tool or the bottom of the transmission pan with an infrared thermometer. Once the transmission temperature is 105 to 113 degrees Fahrenheit, it's time to undo the drain plug. Now, be careful and you'll have to act fast. It took me about 15 minutes for the transmission oil to get the temperature, but once it did, it rose pretty quickly. Once the stream becomes a trickle from the drain port, it's time to put that plug back on. The torque spec here would be 30 foot-pounds. Now we'll button this panel back in with that body pin and torque the fill plug to 36 foot-pounds. My GoPro didn't capture this very well, but now it's time to put back those two 10mm bolts that hold in the trim panel in the wheel well. Finally, let's get that wheel back on, torque it to spec, which is 76 foot-pounds, after lowering the car, and we're done. Thanks for sticking with me through my first YouTube video. I'll have torque specs, part numbers in the description below.